Okay, so I guess the obvious place to start would be giving us a bit of background on Nephos Technologies and when it was formed, why, and what progress you made to date.
Yeah, so we've sort of come a long way since. So we're a 9-year-old company this year. We started off doing something slightly differently. So when we first started, we actually started as a cloud services broker, which back then, 9 years ago, no one had really heard of. And it was just the fact of trying to aggregate multiple cloud services together and provide sort of arbitrage across multiple cloud services, which kind of we thought that people would end up taking sort of a bit of Amazon, a bit of Microsoft and Google and things like that, and would look for some sort of abstraction layer to help them go across those different cloud services. Unfortunately, 9 years ago, nobody knew they needed that, and it wasn't really a thing. We got some great traction. We were awarded a Gartner Call Vendor at the time for it, which helped us have a lot of very interesting conversations. And thankfully, those conversations kind of led to us start doing some object storage, because that was at the time the big sort of cloud thing became object storage, which obviously became S3. But we sort of became known for object storage guys for kind of 3 to 4 years. And then about 4 years ago was the kind of the big sort of shift, the mind shift as to what we do. And that was kind of when we started to become more and more what we are now, which is kind of a consultancy-led data services integrator, which is what we call and define ourselves as. And what that kind of means is we look at the full data stack, sort of end to end. So again, back then, the more sort of we were doing object storage projects, or hybrid cloud projects, or hybrid storage projects. And actually, what we started realizing were more and more of those projects were actually data projects. And it just happened that we were selling the storage part of those things. So as we kind of became closer and closer tied with the customers, they were like, oh, this is great, but it'd be really cool if you could do this part as well, or if you could do that part as well. And actually, we started seeing there's a much wider scope than just the storage part of what we were doing. And we felt there was kind of this gap in the market back then at the time to sort of really truly understand sort of the data experts, which is kind of like what we tried to sort of portray ourselves and talk about being, which is the understanding of how data flows due to data services. So whether that might be a genomics research platform, or a high frequency trading platform, or a global digital asset management solution, or an analytics engine for a pharmaceutical firm. It was that understanding of that entire stack of data services. And that kind of was the big shift that 4 years ago. And we started building up a load of consultancy services, engineering services, and integrated offerings around that piece. And that was the big shift, where in the last 4 years, we've kind of grown over 700%. We're very fortunate to be awarded the top 1,000 fastest growing companies in Europe by the FT last year. So that's kind of where the real big growth has happened, by that just pure focusing on one thing and trying to do one thing well. And that kind of spurred up the mission statement at the time, which was to help organizations solve complex data problems. And we felt that addition of that complex data problems was the biggest difference. So there's a number of companies out there that were selling solutions to solve data problems if you had it, but it's more the fact of that understanding that full stack, trying to understand the complexity of how data moves through all of those elements.
Okay, and in terms of that stack, or I maybe call it a data framework, what is it that you offer, I guess? And I mean, I think you partly answered the question, but why, how and why did you build it, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like I said, over time, we kind of understood this, sort of got an appreciation of what we sort of call the Nephos data framework, which is that kind of end-to-end offering where customers like, this is great. Either we've got to be a massive organization where we get those kind of services from SIs like Accenture or Atos or those types of organizations, and they cost us tens of millions of pounds, or we have to go to 6, 7, 8 different boutique providers that might do different parts of it. And there we're having to manage the understanding of the integration of that end-to-end offering. So actually, what we call our Nephos data framework is effectively, if you sort of go from bottom to top, if you like, is that kind of data processing and storage at bottom, which is kind of like the nuts and bolts, if you like, of actually what you're doing, whether that resides on site or in the cloud. But then it's kind of the data discovery and governance layer to actually understand your data a bit better and how you should govern that to either to meet regulations, but also to drive value. And then the data security and compliance piece on top of it. So we split out that discovery and governance piece to the data security piece, because actually we think individually, each one is just as important. And there is a level of knowledge you need to have to understand both elements rather than just being lumped together as one. And then on top of that, which is what we're seeing more and more of now, is kind of the data asset management piece. So to help organizations understand that gets treated as a core asset, to increase the ability to kind of help either monetize the data or improve the efficiency of the data or improve the customer interactions of that data. And then lastly, the kind of data analytics and services piece. So how you go about building out the dashboards you're supposed to be building out, but also how you go about building out new services, new products to be able to deliver that to customers. But again, to us, that full stack has to be considered when you're looking at any sort of data services project, because actually, if you look at any one of those parts individually, then the others fall down. And I think what we saw, especially kind of over the last kind of 4 years, is that a lot of effort and focus went into that top piece, the data analytics piece. And actually, the parts underneath it kind of got left by the wayside because organizations just felt that as long as we do analytics well, that we can drive the value from our data that way. But actually, if you don't have all of the other pieces set up underneath it, then you kind of get that rubbish data in, rubbish data out strategy. So like I said, a lot of that data framework we've built up is around the consultancy to help organizations understand each one of those elements, to make sure they optimize each one of those elements correctly, but also to look at them in a totality, to understand that kind of end-to-end piece and actually where any of those data services projects might fall down, rather than just focusing on building really nice dashboards, which are fantastic. Unless you've got all of the other parts underneath it to drive the information that goes into those dashboards, you're not getting a true representation of actually how your data resides.
And in terms of the sort of customer engagement with the framework, I'm wondering, I mean, is it one single sort of framework that you've devised, or are you able to, put together a solution for a customer, depending, if they say, they want to use Azure or AWS as part of it, you will incorporate that. So I guess, what's the customer journey, around your data framework?
Yeah, and we're completely agnostic to that. So again, I think there is a hang up sometimes about whether it's cloud or on-site or hybrid, and obviously there's a lot of focus on those sorts of things. And our view on all of that has always been that the data should reside in the correct location for what you're trying to achieve, whether that's on-site, whether that's in the cloud, or whether that's a hybrid, or even if that's SaaS, then you should just take it as a service. Like, our view is actually, like, let's understand what you're trying to achieve first. Let's understand what you're trying to get to, and then build a strategy around that, rather than going in saying, right, we're a cloud first organization and we want to do this. And like, okay, but that's going to cost you 3 times, 4 times what it would cost you to do it on site, or actually you only need 10 or 20% of this data at any one time. So maybe a hybrid solution suits you more, where you're actually getting that 10, 20% on site in much faster time, and maybe the 80, 90% or whatever it might be resides in the cloud. So we're very much a view of actually taking an understanding of what the customer is trying to achieve and then building an offering around that. In terms of where we kind of engage in that framework is, again, it very much is kind of customer led. So we have some customers that, okay, well, we've heavily invested in this infrastructure or heavily invested in this cloud strategy, whatever it might be, but we really need some help with the governance piece. Or actually, we've built some analytics part, but actually now we've realized that that doesn't tie in correctly with the governance and security model we want to put in place. So can we kind of inject your governance and security solutions into that to sit underneath it, so we can drive better results on the output? And again, I'm going to keep repeating, but it is very much that custom-led piece of going, we're not trying to make it an arbitrary solution as you have to take the whole thing. It's very much a case of trying to explain to customers, like, where are your pain points? Like, what are the bits on this you're trying to solve? Yes, we can have the whole thing if you want us to build a new data service for you, if you're looking at building a new platform for X, Y, Z. But more often than not, it's, we've built this stuff, but actually we forgot about this bit, or we didn't realize this bit was quite as important. Can you help us bring that piece up to scratch so that suddenly the whole stack becomes more valuable? So that's kind of where we see it. It's more of a case of, that is the framework that helps us sort of interact with customers to understand, like, where are your problems on this scale? Where are you seeing it? And this is how we can help in that space.
Okay, and maybe flip it the other way. Do you offer sort of standard off-the-shelf solutions, or are they always bespoke? And I guess the reason for that question is, I know you've just launched a data governance as a service offering. So is that something standard, or again, can, within a certain framework, can that be built using different components? Just some understanding of that.
Yeah, so I think, so over time we kind of try to, our expertise or our value is very much that integrated offering. So yeah, we can do elements of it. Absolutely, we can do elements of it, and we can generally do 1 or 2 or 3, maybe different elements of it to provide that end-to-end offering. But what we've seen over time is this kind of repeatable requests for certain things or gaps. So where we try and sort of build that IP, if you like, is where we're providing very similar solutions time and time again from a kind of what we believe to be best of breed offering, but depending on the customer requirement. But there's always little gaps of going, oh, actually, this would be really cool, but if you could do this bit as well. And that bit might be such a small thing, but a really valuable thing. So it might not be the fact that a vendor is in that space currently because actually there's no target addressable market or however they get to want to put their numbers up to it. But actually, if we can build that little extra piece, it adds incredible value to the customer. So we've done that a couple of times. We've done that on something which we call Smart Data Manager, which is very much, we did that a few years ago, which is very much a kind of file and analyzer piece to help organizations get a better understanding of like hot, cold data, aged of data, very sort of metadata driven in terms of trying to helping organizations get a better understanding of their data. And now we've moved recently on to data governance as a service offering, where we kept seeing that organizations are now starting to take data governance more seriously. Obviously, historically, the last few years, it's been very regulatory driven. And that was a case of kind of more of a tick box exercise, whereas now more recently, it seems to become more value driven. And how can we use that data governance piece with things like data quality, data lineage, master data manager, all of those things to drive more value in our data, to that point I was making earlier about driving more value back up to the dashboard and help creating those outputs and things that C-level people and customers can use to actually help understand their data better. And what we found is that actually data governance is a really tricky topic. It can generally involve kind of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 potentially different vendors and different vendor solutions to drive all of those things that I mentioned. Also, because it's quite a new area, there's not generally a large number of people within an organization that have either got expertise in it or are responsible for it. We're kind of seeing it sort of go through that kind of cybersecurity thing of kind of 5, 6 years ago, where cybersecurity became incredibly important, but at the time the skills gap was massive. There wasn't the people that understood cybersecurity back then within organizations. So actually that managed service outsource model worked really well for cybersecurity and still does. We see that same thing around data governance, where there's a big skills gap currently, and organizations are desperately trying to roll this stuff out, which is complicated and big and difficult to understand sometimes. And actually what we've tried to build is that service to then sort of just have that turnkey solution to go, there you go, here is what our data governance frameworks look like. Out of that, which elements do you need? Are you looking at ROPAs and GDPR and data quality and master data management? And it's kind of a very much a menu system to go, discovery and classification underpins everything that we do. But on top of that, you can almost add to it which elements you want. And then it's about driving that value at the top end, about better data insights to your data for data governance, so you can help address data governance gaps or corporate risk gaps to understand how to improve the value of your data that then you push into a data analytics platform or business intelligence platform.
And in terms of just a bit more generally, maybe I mean, big data was, to me, the sort of the headline thing that everyone talked about, and then it's gradually become a bit more nuanced. But I'm increasingly coming across some of this phrase data literacy as a way of describing what's required, I guess. And what role do you think companies such as Nephos Technologies, what's your role in sort of helping folks improve their data literacy, if you like, whether it's educating them themselves or helping them with solutions? I mean, how do you see that?
I think that's a sort of a key part of what we do, and I generally see that kind of the first, second, third phases of engagement with customers is always around that. And I would agree. I think the big data buzzword over the last kind of 5 years is kind of pushed people to try and get big data solutions before they actually understood their data. And we're very much, when we start talking to customers, it's about understanding your data. It's about where do you drive value from your data? Who uses that? How do they use it? Okay, let's build stuff around that, because that's then tailored to you. It's not just let's build a data lake, let's dump all of our data in it, and let's try and drive value from that. Well, what's the point? If actually only 10% of that data is valuable to you, why put everything into a data lake just for the sake of having a data lake? And I think now we're moving past that stage. I do think now that data literacy is building, but it's still kind of to the point now, at least when we're having meetings, customers are like, I now know what my problem is. I understand that I have a problem in this space. Can you help me? And I think part of that data literacy is kind of going through that kind of, like I said, that second or third phase now. Customers are going, okay, cool. So you now get the problem. How do we fix it? And actually, we tell you how to fix it until you tell us what you want. So if we gave you this whole phrase, we like using the phrase, like, if I gave you a clean piece of paper, like, what would you want to build? Like, how does that drive value to your business in terms of, it'd be really nice if I could have this data here, or if I could have these users look at it this way, or I could build these new products for our customers. Awesome. Like, we're the experts. We can help you do that. We can help you, give you the understanding as to what you need to do, why you need to do it, and give you 2 or 3 different options of potentially how you could do it, and talk you through those options. So we very much see our sort of sales as that kind of try to be that expert advisor in that data space, where sort of helping educate the customers in that data literacy piece to the point where they can start making better decisions as to what they want to do, and then helping them get to there when they have those decisions.
And in terms of the sort of the trends to date, I mean, we tend to assume that certain industries have been the leaders when it comes to, you know, using the data to turn into information, and then, you know, money, value, whatever. But is it everyone? Is it relevant to everyone? You know, I mean, the smallest organization, and I guess that, I suppose the question is, what can people achieve? You know, the education piece, I guess, is important, but where are we at in terms of, you know, a lot of people might think, oh, I can't afford that, or it's not relevant to me, I run a small little business. Yeah, just some sort of sense of the potential of it, and you know, who's doing what with it, maybe.
Yeah, and I definitely think there is a scale. I definitely think there is a scale as to, I think the first part of that scale is understanding, why is your data valuable? And like I said, I think there's certain industries, financial services industries as an example, that it's super clear why their data is valuable, right? So I think there's certain industries that can help drive value more from their data. But even then, it's that next step of going, okay, excellent. So now how can I interact with my customers better? How can I take that data to drive new products, new services that actually my customers want? And I think that's the next step. So I think on that kind of journey piece, that, like I said, there are customers where actually there's probably little they can gain from the value of their data, but there still is something. And then there's all the way up to customers where they've already gained some value from their data, and now the next part is actually being able to provide additional products and services to their customers, because that's the way that all organizations are going. And I think some of the larger, more traditional organizations are understanding that, because they're now being disrupted by SaaS startups, where you can just download something on your phone and suddenly you've got a whole new world of data services. You can see that from the startup banks and kind of the fintech piece, where they're absolutely disrupting the more traditional banking system. And now the banking system are trying to keep up by building new data services, but they can only do that if they can understand their data better. Obviously, it's a lot easier for a new startup to have nothing to start off with. So I think that piece is the disruption that's happening is driving that. Like even in every industry. So the more industries that are being disruptive, the more that these organizations are now suddenly going, okay, we have to do something better with our data. And funnily enough, they're actually in a better place because they have the customers, they have the data, they have the information. It's just now they're slowly starting to use it to actually drive those better interactions with their customers.
And we talked sort of, I guess, the general there in terms of industry sectors and where they're at. Are you able, you know, I know there's confidential in that, but customers, whether you can name names or just more generally, give us 1 or 2 examples where, you know, Nephos Technologies has helped companies on this sort of data journey?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ones. We've got some a large global engineering firm where we've helped them centralize their data, so then they can start making better decisions. So there was eventually it's going to be like well over 1,000 sites, but helping them get to a point where actually all of that file data, which was highly valuable to them, all resided locally within those sites. And whilst they were sharing data through a number of different means, there's no kind of overall overarching data strategy. So working with them over multiple years to help them move to a point where actually now they've centralized that data, where they're providing sort of way more data minimization and kind of just your base level sort of archive and solutions around that to be able to have huge cost savings from an infrastructure perspective. But now they've centralized their data, they can actually start making better decisions on it. And they can start looking at actually, are there certain designs that we do that are common across multiple things, and starting to sort of drive better insights into actually how they are using that data, and actually providing better advice and internally where actually maybe a project in Dubai becomes relevant to a project in Canada. And they can have that information in a centralized place where people can actually have a data rather than it all being isolated into specific areas.
Okay, and this may or may not be relevant, but I'm just wondering, with the COP26 conference, just concluded. I mean, data. I mean, it's sustainability and data. I know, my background's the storage industry, and no one ever deletes anything because they're terrified that the boss is going to ask them for it just after they deleted it. But do you think, set against all this, because clearly there's amazing value in data, but do you think also there's a role to actually distinguish which bits of data maybe are no longer of any use, and someone might actually get rid of them as opposed to storing all this data just in case?
Yeah, and funny enough, that's another example of one of the things that we're doing. I think contracts and regulation have a massive part to play in that. I think that, as an example, we're doing work with the UK Challenger Bank, where we're helping them identify data that's over 7 years old from customers, and actually ability to remove that data across all of their systems. So the ability to specifically target and identify certain people that are no longer with the bank after 7 years, and be able to get all of that data removed. So it's no longer affecting. And I think that's the other part about the we can hold on to data forever, but that data can also warp the decisions that we might make in the future. So actually the ability to identify, and this is part of what we do for the governance piece, the ability to identify data that is no longer relevant and remove that data. So again, it helps improve the analytics and the business intelligence that you're pulling from your data. Because actually, if you're looking at data that's 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, how relevant is that to the direction you want the company to move in the first place? So I think the regulation perspective, obviously that's stronger in certain industries than others, but I do think there is an ability to that. But then also the factors to organizations have to take better ownership and better care as to what data is relevant to the decisions they're making. So actually, retail are fantastic at this, actually, obviously, in terms of like the last 30 days or the last season or last Christmas, whatever it might be, to make plans based on what they should have based on historical data in a shorter window. But I do think other organizations will start doing that. If you look at architecture as an example, the style changes year to year or every 5 years or every couple of years. So actually that fact to stay on style or stay on trend becomes way more important than just having all of your designs for the last 20 years, because that could effectively enable a much more a better bid or much more data-driven decisions.
Okay, so maybe as we sort of finish, it'd be good to have one or two final thoughts, particularly for people. I mean, I'd say it'd be difficult to be in business and not be aware that your data, customer data in particular, or whatever it is, has some value importance. But a lot of people may well be, fairly early in that journey, and so still thinking, what can I've been told my data is valuable, but how do I find out, in what ways, etc. Just one or two bits of guidance, or maybe people who started the journey and been a little bit disappointed with the results. What are the couple of key things to think about when you're looking at this whole sort of data piece?
Yeah, and I think that the way that we try to talk about it is, I think that the organizations should be focusing solely on what value they drive from their data. And I think too much at the moment, organizations are focused on, and some of this is that this side of the table's fault in terms of trying to push product or trying to push certain things, but stop worrying about tools or infrastructure and start worrying about your data as an asset and thinking about it that way, and thinking about how can I drive value from it? What potential new products or services can I build on it? How can it flow through the business? And then try and find expert partners, hopefully like Nephos, but in the ilk of Nephos, that can support that, rather than just working on, well, okay, I need to buy another storage array, or I need to buy a tool for data governance, or I need to buy a cybersecurity tool. And I think there is a step change that needs to happen to stop worrying about products and solutions, and start worrying more about the outcomes of how I'd like to use my data. And I think when that switch kind of flips, and I think some of the things people like the chief data officer coming into organizations and becoming part of the exec team and that type of stuff is helping that change happen. But I think starting to think about data as a tangible asset and what can I do with that, rather than just something that sits on some disk and some tools that I need to manage it and how I can do that. That would be the first kind of the sort of chasm that people can jump across, and then you can start making plans and strategies how to work with that data on that point.
Brilliant. Well, Michael, it's been lovely to chat to you, and thanks very much for your time. It's been great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. Thanks.